Hi, everyone. My name is Effie Makrygiannis, and I am a founding member and current secretary of the AAVMP. And I'm here with Dr. Hicks, and today we're going to talk about our experience as multiracial Americans, Asian Americans to be specific. And so, just a little bit about me. I just graduated from St. George's University this January, and I'll be pursuing a small animal rotating medicine and surgery internship at the University of Georgia, which I'm very excited about, with the hopes of one day becoming a veterinary oncologist. I really enjoy Eastern and Western medicine, so I pursued an acupuncture certification as well, because I do think that's one of the best ways we can offer an ultimate standard of care to our patients. And I am a fourth generation Japanese and first generation Greek American. And Dr. Hicks, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kelly Hicks. I also went to St. George's University. I am one of the founding members of AAVMP, and I am our current visual communications director. Right now, I'm currently doing my small animal rotating internship at Virginia, Maryland, College of Veterinary Medicine, and I'm actually going to become a medical oncology resident at Oregon State University come July. I'm really excited about that. My background is I am a second generation Filipino on my mom's side, and my dad is a Caucasian American who is an Air Force veteran.
Awesome. I just love learning about you like that.
We have very
So,
similar backgrounds.
yes, we and so again, today we're going to talk about our experience as multiracial Americans. And so we've prepared a few questions to answer, but if you're watching this talk later and you feel like you have more questions for us, feel free to send us an email at asiansinvetmed@gmail.com, and we'll include that in the description below. So getting right into it, Kelly, if you want to answer our first question, growing up, how was your experience being multiracial?
Yeah, so it definitely was an interesting experience for me growing up. I went to the same school from first grade through eighth grade, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas originally. And I was one of the only Asian children in my class. There were a couple of Asians within all of those grades, but I was the only Asian in my class. So I definitely felt isolated a lot of the time because of my different skin tone, primarily. When I was younger too, I had a lot of my classmates bully me for being Asian, and it wasn't really a big deal, but they would always come up to me and they would, do the eye thing and say ching chong. And it was just upsetting for me as a young child for me not to be accepted by my classmates and my peers. And I remember one moment pretty distinctly as well when I was probably in like third grade or so. I had a substitute teacher come in, and we were all doing roll call. And so she called out my name and she was like, "Where's Kelly Hicks?" And so I raised my hand. And she just made a comment saying that, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you to look Asian based off of your name." And so that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, especially when I was young. So definitely wasn't a great childhood, being so isolated and being an Asian, multiracial Asian American in my community for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's difficult too, to be a child where you're not equipped with the confidence, like love yourself and love your heritages and both of them strongly, to be made fun of. And that can be very discomforting and painful for when you're so young. So I'm sorry that you had to go through that, because that makes me sad.
That's okay. I mean, it wasn't, now that I think about it, I think that it makes me like a stronger person,
Yeah.
but still upsetting that I had to deal with that when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, I think in contrast to you, I didn't really feel nearly as isolated growing up, but I think that's become because I was coming from Los Angeles, which is kind of a melting pot of sorts. It's very diverse. And so I think I lived in this little bubble where I was surrounded by Asian Americans. I was surrounded by people who look like me. Um, And so I don't really think I felt nearly as isolated growing up, which I'm grateful for, because had I had the experiences that you had as a child, I think that would have been really hard to deal with. Um, I did experience some of them when I went to spent my summers in Europe and Greece. There are not as many Asian people over there. It's pretty Caucasian over there. So I stood out a little bit more, and I would hear people say, like, oh, look, the um, Chinese girls here for the summer. And I was like, oh, like that's a little offensive.
Yeah.
Um, or I'd hear them say things about me in Greek while I'm walking down the street, and I'd turn around and in Greek say, like, hey, that hurts my feelings. Why did you say that? And they would apologize afterwards and say, I didn't know you spoke Greek. My apologies, but it shouldn't take someone standing up for themselves to stop that kind of behavior. So, um, yeah, but for the most part in the United States of America, I didn't really experience nearly any of that. Growing up as a multiracial American. So
Yeah, I feel like it's really upsetting that you had to stand up for yourself when you were in
yeah,
Greece. It's like they expected you not to speak Greek,
yeah,
which is, people shouldn't expect that based off of the way that you look and that you look differently from the rest of the community. So it's just um, it's upsetting that so many people go through that.
yeah,
Even here in the United States, like I know a lot of people who've gone through that as well here, and it's upsetting that you have to go through that, you know.
yeah.
But
That that's a common shared experience between people,
yeah.
because it shouldn't be. But yeah. Well, do you identify with one side more than the other then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So interestingly enough, I thought that I probably associated more with my Filipino side when I was younger, probably because I was so kind of isolated from the rest of my community. So um, I think that I was very strong with my Filipino roots when I was younger. My mom um, really tried to make her culture and her heritage known to me when I was younger. So she would try to teach me her language. We ate Filipino food all the time. And we celebrated a lot of Filipino traditions. So I think that when I was younger, I definitely was more in tune to my Filipino side. And it's interesting because now, as I'm an adult and I'm kind of on my own, I I don't feel like disconnected from my Filipino side. I just don't really associate myself as much with my Filipino side as my Caucasian side now. I think it's probably because I'm not with my mom and my grandma and my family on my Filipino side as much now that I'm moving around the country all the time. And so I do probably identify more with my Caucasian side now, but I do really appreciate both of my heritages, no matter what. So,
Yeah.
what about?
I I can totally feel that too. As I think for me, I identify more with my Greek side. Um, and so I am, again, as I said before, Yonsei generation, so fourth generation Japanese and first generation Greek. So um, I think growing up, because I was surrounded by so many Asian Americans, I wanted to feel, I think I clung to my Greek side a little bit more because I had such a strong influence from my dad, but also because it made me unique. And so I liked that. Um, and so I spent my summers in Greece. I learned Greek when I was like learning English at the same time. So I think it was just um, there more. And so I think growing up, I definitely identified more with the Greek side, which again is very interesting that we're similar but kind of opposite. And I think now with the development of the AVMP and the recent tragedies our community has faced, and then how large our community has grown, because of them, and then also just in general, I think I've started to get more in touch with my Asian side, which I'm really grateful for, and I'm welcoming with open arms, and I'm excited to learn more about that culture. But definitely growing up, I think I identified more with the Greek side, but I'm learning to um, love my Japanese side just as much. Not that I ever loved either less, but
Yeah.
I'm starting to learn more about it. Yeah.
Have you ever been to Japan?
I've never been to Japan. I've been to Greece so many times. I've never been to Japan. So definitely trying to get out there one day as well and see the cousins on that side and make those relationships and keep them strong because family is everything. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
Okay, along those same lines, you talked about this earlier, but did you ever feel like really isolated as an Asian American, multiracial?
Yeah, so definitely when I was younger, being the only Asian in my class was definitely made me feel very isolated and um, made me a lot more shy, I think, when I was younger because I was just afraid to kind of express myself and my Asian roots to my classmates because I fear that they would judge me. Um, and I think nowadays um, I I don't necessarily I feel isolated equally from both, which sounds kind of weird. But whenever I'm kind of in a group of solely Caucasian Americans, I feel like I'm judged or not judged, but like the way that like when you can sense people just staring at you because you're different. Um, and I feel that a lot more when I'm in either setting. So if I'm in a group with just solely Caucasian people, I feel like they judge me based off of the color of my skin tone being too yellow. Um, and surprisingly enough, I when I sometimes go back to the Philippines, I think that they also judge me as well, not on purpose, but just based off of my looks, because Filipinos are, for the most part, very dark skinned, and I'm a little bit more white skin than they are used to. And I've had family members kind of tell me, oh, you're so white. Like, I wish I could be like you, and things like that whenever I go back to the Philippines. And I know they don't mean anything of it, but just the concept of it and them kind of bringing it up makes me feel a little bit more isolated, even though I know they're not doing it on purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I share that same experience where sometimes family members will make comments and they don't understand that it can be hurtful what they're saying and because they're just saying something that's come to mind, but they don't understand that the things that we experience growing up as multiracial Americans and how things can be offensive or you never really think about, I know, like the color of your skin tone that much until you're placed in these positions and then you're like, oh my gosh, now I'm self-conscious about it. Like, am I too light? Am I too, like, it's unfortunate you ever are placed in those positions. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like it happens to everybody,
Yeah.
no matter what color skin you have.
Yeah.
And like in today's society, I feel like we shouldn't have to deal with that. And I do
Mhm.
think that we've been improving throughout the past few decades, but still something that us as a whole community and could improve on for sure. So,
Definitely. And so much more room to improve too.
yeah, I
Uh,
agree.
I think for myself, it varied again on a day to day basis. I share a very similar experience to you. If you put me in a homogenous group of Japanese people, I look distinctly white. If you put me in a homogenous group of Caucasian people, I look distinctly Asian. And so I've never really felt like I um, fit into either of those categories. And so speaking of categories, when you're filling out applications, I remember when I was filling out like the common application for colleges or scholarship applications, you have to pick which race you are or identify your race. And for some reason in 2020 and in the recent 2000s, you can only pick one box. And so I would sit there and say, well, what am I feeling today? Am I feeling more Asian? Am I feeling more Caucasian? And it was an internal dilemma. And I know people don't think about this, and
Yeah.
people don't think that, oh, like, why would that be a like dilemma? Just pick one. I always felt like whichever one I chose was letting down the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'd fill out the majority of my applications with my mom just because my dad was working professional, like 8 to 6 schedule. So he wasn't there when I was doing those. And so she'd be like, oh, well, like, just pick. And I was like, well, I'm with you. So I feel like I want to pick the Asian one so that you don't feel
Yeah.
offended. But what if dad hears or like looks at my application later and he sees that I picked Asian? Is he going to feel sad that I don't identify more with my Greek side, even though it's a perfectly even split?
Yeah.
And so I felt a lot of younger me felt a lot of turmoil making those decisions. It's something so trivial, but it really impacted me, and it led to a lot of like introspective thoughts later. Um, Now I think a days, most of the times applications when I go to fill them out have one or the other, or they have the box called other. So usually I'll just check that and I'm like, I'm an other. So here I am.
Yeah.
Um, but that caused me a lot of stress growing up, which I don't know if, looking back, I don't know if that was necessary stress, but definitely something younger me really focused on, because I think it
Yeah.
was just a little bit of an identity crisis of which one am I and why can't I be both? And I struggled with that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is definitely something that is hard when you're younger. Um, and personally, it's kind of it goes back to when I mentioned when one of my teachers thought that my name didn't match my what I look like in person. And so whenever I fill out applications, I feel kind of obligated to put that I'm Caucasian because of the way my last name looks.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I put Asian and they like meet me in an interview or something like that, they're like, you're not white, you're Asian. Or I totally see where you're coming from too. And it's not like a huge deal that this is happening and we have these inner struggles, but I think that it needs to be made known,
Yeah.
because other people who aren't multiracial don't have this problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are other people who are just like us who are young and struggling, and so want them to know that it's totally okay to struggle, and just close your eyes and pick one. It really doesn't matter in the long run.
Yeah.
Okay, well, along those lines, career paths and applications, what were your parents' thoughts on your choice to become a veterinarian?
Yeah, so because my mom is from the Philippines and she grew up in the Philippines, she essentially grew up in a third world country and didn't have a lot of resources, and food was hard to come by, and education was hard to come by. And so she did so well for herself. She was one out of 10 siblings. And so she ended up going to nursing school in the Philippines and became a nurse, which is very typical profession for Filipinos. Um, because of that, the Philippines is oversaturated with nurses, and so she had to move away from her family, which was very difficult for her because she's very family oriented because of her roots and being Filipino. So she moved away from her family, ended up coming to the United States eventually, and now she is where she is right now. And so because of her background, growing up, she definitely wanted her children to have the best and that we were doing the right decisions, primarily financially, because she didn't have that luxury of being financially stable when she was growing up. And so she was very adamant that me and my sister were, whatever we did in our career path, that we were financially stable. Which makes a lot of sense. And because she is a nurse, I did feel the pressure that she wanted me to stay within the human medical profession, whether that be a nurse or become a doctor or something in the human medical profession, just because I mean, no matter what you are in the human medical profession, they make decent money to where you are financially stable. And growing up, she enrolled me in magnet school that was medically, like human medical, based. And so when I was in high school, we did a lot of human medicine. We went to the hospitals and did clinical rotations, very similar to what we do in vet med, in vet school. And I drew blood for my classmates and things like that. But she really wanted me to be in the human profession. And I really tried to accept that side. But I wasn't as happy doing human medicine as I was with veterinary medicine. And I definitely really tried in undergrad to stick with that career path, but it ultimately didn't make me happy as an individual, I think. And I think that was really hard for my mom, me making that transition. It's the entire like concept of it is the same. It's just animals versus humans. But the fact that veterinarians they make so much less than our human counterparts was really something that was hard for my mom to kind of wrap her head around. Um, and so I do think initially it was really hard for her to accept the fact that I wanted to do vet med, and I wanted to go to an island school, and I was going to be in thousands of dollars of debt when I came out of school, and then go to internship and only make like $30,000 a year. It was really hard for my mom to wrap her head around that, but she saw how happy that I was, and this is what I ultimately wanted to do with my life. And I'm very grateful for her support throughout all of it. And she has been so supportive now and has helped me throughout my time in that school and internship. And I really appreciate my mom having that concern for my financial stability, and also accepting the fact that this is what I wanted to do and this is what makes me happy. And so I really appreciate that, and that's kind of my story. I feel like it's a very similar story to a lot of Asian veterinary professionals. Whether that be your parents want you to do law or medicine, something that's very like prestigious and for the family name. And I think it's a very similar story that other Asian Americans would be able to relate to in the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that since we've started the AVMP, we hear a lot of those stories too from students being like, how do I have the conversation with my parents that I want to do veterinary medicine? How
Yeah.
do I tell them that I love animals and I don't want to be a human doctor. I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to help animals. So I think for them to be able to hear your story and see how successful you've been will be encouraging. And then also I think you did some great things in that you tried your best, but also you shared your passions with your mother. And it's great that your mother was able to recognize that and support you still,
Mhm.
because that can be the scariest thing, disappointing a parent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
after they've sacrificed so much for you to get to where you are, the last thing you want to do, all you want to do is make them happy and make them proud. So
Yeah.
um, I'm glad that she was supportive of you in that, and that's awesome.
Yeah, she's great. I love her.
I think for me, again, in contrast to you, I had my mom's and dad's support, from the start. My mom is the Japanese one. My dad was born and raised in Greece, moved here when he was in his teens, and went from nothing and became an engineer. So both my parents came from pretty low socioeconomic statuses, and then kind of worked their way up. They just wanted me to pursue something that made me happy, but also, again, along the lines of what your parents wanted, made me financially be able to be stable in the future. And
Mhm.
I originally was interested in medicine in general, and then realized one day I kind of liked animals a little bit more than I liked humans. And so my parents were like, yeah, I love that. Go be a veterinarian. I think you'd be a fantastic veterinarian. They facilitated shadowing experiences for me. Um, one summer we were in Greece, and there was a seagull walking on the street, and I was really concerned for the seagull because it was, one second, my dog. I was really concerned for the seagull because it was walking, and it was, oh, Sorry.
That's okay.
The joys of animals.
Yep.
And so it was walking on the street and it didn't look like it could fly. So I was really concerned for it. And I was like, Mom, like we're miles from the beach. We need to go get this seagull and we need to make sure that it's at least close to water so that it has a happy last few days if it can't fly. And she's like, oh, it's a bird. Just leave it. And I was like, no, Mom, take your shirt off, give it to me, and I'm gonna then have you go flank the seagull and I'll come in the front and I'll throw the shirt on. And so that's what we did. And my mom fully committed. She ran at that seagull with big arms and was screaming. And I threw the shirt on the seagull. We captured it and we walked back to the beach together. This was in Greece. So even if that was in the States, you'd probably blink an eye and be like, okay, she likes animals. But in Greece, they were like, what is she doing over there? So I think at that point, my mom was like, okay, this is what she wants to do for the rest of her life. We support that. But I think if you look at my family, I'm a doctor, my brother is an engineer, and my sister is in business right now and is maybe considering law school. So we fit that stereotype that you mentioned earlier, that Asian parents want their children to go into prestigious careers.
Mm-hmm.
I think luckily for all of us, we're all passionate about what we're doing, and it just happened to fill those roles. But I know a lot of people, again, who graduate from medical school and say, I don't even want to be a doctor. I just did this to make my parents happy. So I'm grateful to have had the support like you did. And I'm grateful that the support came from the beginning, but I know that others are not so lucky. So I think it's great that we can share both of our experiences and people know that they can reach out to us, if they have questions on how to approach that. So
Yeah.
awesome. I think the last question we have is, have you ever experienced any microaggressions or blatant racism?
Yeah, so I definitely experienced some, but not a whole lot. I think the most common question that I get from others in the community, basically, and when I'm in clinics sometimes too, is the "What are you?" question, and it happens with people that I've been friends with or acquaintances. Oh my God, I can't speak. With for like a few weeks or things like that. And they just ask me, so what are you? And I'm just like, I know what you're asking me, but could you just clarify? Like, I'm a human being. I don't know what you want from me. But I know what they're trying to pick at is what is your background? Like, what is your race? Just because I don't look like a normal Filipino or don't look like a normal Caucasian person. So they always ask that, which is fine. I know it rises some curiosity for others that are just that are not multiracial, and so it's fine. Like usually I will answer the question like, oh, I'm half Filipino, half Caucasian, and they always seem to try and guess what kind of Asian I am, and they're always wrong. And and it's just like I'd rather just tell you straight off the bat because I know you're gonna get it wrong. Because I don't fit the image of what you think an Asian Filipino looks like, but whatever. I mean, I think that's probably the only really microaggression that I've experienced, which isn't a terrible one to experience, honestly, based off of what's been going on in our society with current events, with COVID especially. And I haven't really experienced any blatant racism, which I'm very fortunate to not have experienced that. But I know friends and family that have experienced blatant racism, just going to work or being on the subway, things like that. And um, the society that we're in this day and age, that shouldn't be a thing anymore, but unfortunately it is. So I'm very fortunate to not have dealt with that yet in my lifetime. What
Yeah.
about you?
Um, I get that "what are you" question all the time too. If you look at my name, you're like, that sounds Greek. And then you look at me like, what are, you're not Greek. So I experienced that a lot. And I think I've learned to deal with the situation with levity. And so I joke and I'm like, haha, yeah, I know I don't look exactly what you thought I would look like based off of my name, like, yes, I am mixed. And yes, I am very exotic looking. You hit the nail right on the head. I've learned to deal with that with levity, but I think, recently I've learned maybe that's a coping mechanism for how I am when I'm approached with these questions. I'll usually, like you said, volunteer the information if I have someone looking at me.
Mhm. You can
Kind of
just
weird.
tell when they look at you a certain way that they're curious,
Yeah.
but they're too afraid to ask the question.
Exactly. So I'll just say, oh yeah, I'm Japanese and Greek and blah blah blah, and people, you can see like a wave of relief come across their face because they know now what you are. Um, and yeah, so I do get that a lot. I get, what are you? I get, you look so exotic. Um, so I don't think that we should have to deal with those questions. I don't think that that should be the first question that pops into someone's mind, whether it's based out of just pure curiosity or slight ignorance as or anything else. Um, but I do face that question a lot. Another one that I get, or I've faced some microaggressions. I didn't really again face them growing up in LA just because it was such a diverse melting pot.
Yeah.
But when I started going away for school, I started to get them a little bit more because I left my bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was with a group of friends, it was an Oriental night at the restaurant down the road, and my friend looked at me and goes, "Oh my gosh, Oriental, is that what you are, Effie?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I kind of sat there just a little bit taken aback, and I didn't really have anything to say because I was so shocked that that sentence had even come out of her mouth.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think something I struggle with, and maybe you struggle with it too, and a lot of our peers, is that when do you broach that topic? When do you have that conversation? And
Yeah.
at the risk of losing a friend or getting people upset or saying, "Oh, it was just a joke, like calm down, don't take it so seriously." Um, so I struggle with that a lot. And I know that now I'm getting more comfortable in speaking up when the instances happen, but definitely in my younger years, I just took whatever statements were made at me
Yeah.
because
And
I
like
wanted to be
accepted it.
non-problematic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like now with my age, if somebody makes a comment that is potentially racist or something like that, that I will kind of speak up to them, even if it's people that I have been part of my life for a long period of time, like friends and family, just because that shouldn't be something that we need to discuss or we need to talk about, I guess, in this age. My thought process is just not with it right now, but I think that it's important though to kind of talk about it and not be silent when we are like having internal struggles with what they're saying to us about heritage or race or racism, things like that. So I think it's important for us to stand up for ourselves because Asians are known to being very quiet and very compliant and not standing up for themselves, I feel like. And I think that we need to break that stigma and we need to stand up for ourselves, even if it's people that we know and we love. I think that it's important to bring it up for sure.
Absolutely. I had another instance on a bus where I was with a professor and we were driving and he was looking at me and giving me the look. And I was like, okay, here it comes. And he's like, so what are you? And I was like, oh, I'm a Japanese and Greek American. And he goes, wow. And he sat there and I was like, and end, like, don't take it any further. And he goes, you are the prime example of hybrid vigor. And I just sat there and I was like, what did he just say to me? And I think he meant it as a compliment because he continued to dig by saying, those are both very strong cultures genetically that come from very strong histories and have people who tend to live very long and happy and healthy lives. So to be a combination of both of those cultures, I should consider myself very lucky because I truly am the vision of hybrid vigor. And he just continued to say these things. And I just was like, thank you so much, because I didn't know what else to say to someone who
Yeah.
teaches me and gives me a grade. And so I was like, okay. And I got off the bus at the next stop, even though I was not at school. And I walked that entire distance, and you know that distance.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just is shocking that again these comments are made. But I agree, in my older, as I continue to grow and as I continue to be more aware of my surroundings, and especially with the development of the AVMP, I've learned to stand up for myself a little bit more and not be quiet in times of when I witness microaggressions or even blatant racism, which fortunately I have had the microaggressions, but not the blatant racism. So I'm thankful for that. But I've learned to speak up a little bit more because, like you said, we tend to be, as Asians, pretty quiet and not problematic in situations. And I think that we need to find ourselves a little bit more of a voice and
Yeah.
speak out if we ever want to see any changes be made.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. So. Well, that I think is it for the questions that we had prepared. So if anyone else is watching this YouTube video later and has some questions for us, feel free to email us again at asiansinvetmed@gmail.com, and we would be happy to answer them for you. And Kelly, it has been an honor doing this talk with you. I've really enjoyed it and learning about you. And I think it's a great way to wrap up our AAPI Heritage Month lecture series and celebrate our culture and heritage. For those of you watching, if you missed those other ones, feel free to find them on our YouTube channel. We have some awesome ones, including being AAPI in veterinary medicine, how general practitioners and specialists can work together, and then an awesome talk from a registered social worker about kind of just mental health and veterinary medicine in general. So feel free to check those out. Alrighty. Kelly, I will see you later.
Bye.
Bye.